Hey guys, so this week we're going to talk about something that's kind of complicated, kind of cool. We're going to talk about how to produce stop motion animation at really high quality results without spending any money on the situation. So, there's a few things I need to cover here that are like the basic fundamentals of how you can improve on the results using what you already have. So these are things I've picked up over the years of messing with this kind of thing. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about is that everybody pretty much knows the idea is you take picture, you move whatever the camera is pointing at, you take another picture, and through the magic of putting them all together into a sequence, you get an animation. Now, there's a lot of things that can make this look a lot better, little subtle things that you may not have thought of. So, the first one I wanted to mention is an even rate of motion is very important in the subject matter. So, if you're shooting a moving object and it jumps forward and then moves slow and jumps forward and moves slow when it should be just moving smoothly forward, that's not going to look as good. So make sure that the rate of motion is smooth. The next thing I wanted to mention is lighting. Your lighting has to be even. It can't be changing as you take the pictures. It can take a long time to take all of the pictures that are required for a sequence. And if you're using the sunlight through the window as your light source, then guess what? The sun is moving the whole time. And by the time you finish your sequence, the light will be entirely different. So you actually do need to be in a room where you can control the light. And you should use a light that is balanced closer to sunlight. So a more blue light. It shouldn't be a orange colored light, what you'd normally see in a house. You'd want a more white balanced or sunlight balanced light bulb for this use. And yeah, so there's those. And you also need to have your camera mounted to something that does not move. Well, I shouldn't say does not move. Something that only moves when you specifically want it to move. So you need a camera mount. That could be a tripod, that could be something with wheels on it that the camera bolts to. It could be all sorts of different stuff. But the idea here is that the camera doesn't move in between the shots back and forth. It doesn't wiggle around. If the camera did wiggle around, it's going to look really shaky and bad. So make sure your camera is locked down. And this goes double for when you're actually pushing the button to take the picture. If you have a remote for your camera where you can trigger it to take a picture without touching it, that's the best. But if you don't have that, basically lock your camera down really well so that when you push that button, the pressure from your hand moving the camera doesn't move the camera, because otherwise it's going to, affect the angle of all your shots. They're all going to go a little Dutch. Okay. Now, speaking of mounting things and tying things down, you want to have complete control of your subject matter. So if you're taking pictures of something that's moving in front of the camera, you want a way to be able to tie down parts of it that aren't supposed to be moving so that you can absolutely know that only the spots on your subject that you want to move are moving. That's very, very important. Sometimes people use putty or two-sided tape or wire or all these different things. On a stop motion animation set, they'll actually have holes in the set where the wires can go up through and attach to the feet of the puppets. Things like that help a lot to make it look really good. Now, talking about other really subtle things that can make all the difference in the world. On your camera, you want to check and see if it has a manual mode. Manual mode will make this job so much easier for a few reasons. First one is focus. Most cameras don't expect the user to know what they're doing, so they have autofocus. And that works great for taking snapshots, but when every time you take a picture, it's changing the focus, right? And in stop motion animation, you're taking hundreds of photographs and you want the focus to be where you want the focus to be. You don't want the focus to change for every single frame of the animation to be focused on something different. It looks chaotic and wild and weird and just drops the production quality quite a bit. Okay, next one is the ISO or exposure setting on the camera. This should also not be set to auto. See, what happens with the exposure is that's how bright the camera thinks the room is, and it compensates for that. So if it's set to automatically detect that, the brightness of your photos will change every time you take a picture. Now, this is again fine for snapshots, but when you're taking hundreds or thousands of pictures in a row and it's set to auto, then the exposure is going to go up, down, up, down, up, down, and it's going to create some strobing and pulsing lighting effects that you really don't want. All right, the next one is shutter speed. This one, you may be able to get away with your camera auto doing it, but if you can set this up manually, it is better to set it up manually. This is how long the camera opens the shutter to take the picture. And if this is set to a locked in value, it's really going to help make the animation look really, really smooth and professional. Next one is aperture. And this is a similar sort of situation as to the two previous ones. If the aperture is constantly changing, it's going to look not as good as it could. And one of the really strange things that can happen with automatic aperture enabled is that your depth of field, the fuzziness behind what you're shooting will change in between every shot. And that really is not something that looks very good at the end of the day. And the last one of these camera settings that I wanted to talk about was white balance. You don't want to have the camera automatically detecting white balance if you can help it. If it is set to auto, what will happen is that each photo will have a slightly different correction value for being warm to cold looking. So reds to blues. And it'll fluctuate around and it'll cause your color not to be consistent from one frame of the animation to the next. All right. So the next thing I wanted to talk about here is once you've got your set put together and your camera locked down and your camera settings the way that you want, you've got your animation all smooth, it's time to go and upload these things to the internet. And there's a few details here that everyone should know whenever they're publishing anything to the internet. The first one is copyright. Most people don't really understand how this works. They think that you have to have a lawyer that goes and magically gets you copyright. That's not how copyright works. Copyright happens when a work is created. So when you take your pictures, when you edit those pictures into a video, that work is copyrighted and you own the copyright for that work. Period. It's that easy. That's just how it works. Now, the other side of things is trademarks. There's always a temptation to use other people's copyrighted material and other people's trademarks in your work. Just don't do it. Take the time, make your own things from scratch. You can't use other people's trademarks. That includes company logos, all those kinds of things. You just simply can't do it, and don't do it. All right, so you've cleaned out all of the copywritten material and all of the trademarks that you're not allowed to use, and you're uploading it. And YouTube or whichever video service you're going to be using has licenses that you can upload this to release it. And in the case of YouTube, there's a standard YouTube license or the Creative Commons with attribution license. The standard YouTube license is essentially that YouTube has permission to distribute this thing out, but you still own the copyright. And the Creative Commons license with attribution basically says is that anyone can redistribute this thing that you're putting out, but they have to give you credit for it if they do that. And for most people, either one of those licenses is totally fine, and it's not going to matter a whole lot. It's basically the choice of, do you want anyone besides YouTube to be able to, share your video out and distribute it themselves. If you're monetizing your channel and you want you want your channel to be the only place where people can see it, then obviously the standard YouTube license may be a better choice than Creative Commons. Okay, now there's some other stuff here that you can do beyond these things to make your video production more well-rounded. So I wanted to talk about a few things here. When you're designing your intro, outro, your logos, lower thirds, titles, any of that kind of stuff, you can use free open source software to do the graphic design for this stuff. The easiest couple to get a hold of would be the GIMP, and that's the GNU image manipulation program. That's for making art. It's for making all of the art that you may need to create titles and logos and all that stuff, and you don't need money to buy this software. You can just download it for free. Okay, beyond that, if you get in a little bit deeper and you want to do some vectors and things like that, you might want to look into Inkscape. It's another open source freeware program that's really good at doing vector art. And vector art can be really useful in any situation where you need to be able to scale your images up and down infinitely. Okay, so I did want to mention that having an intro and an outro is very important. It helps put the work that you're uploading into the context of your channel. You can, slap something on the beginning, slap something on the back that says, this is my thing. And then at the end, thanks for watching my thing, subscribe to the channel, all that sort of stuff. It's, people never remember to actually subscribe or hit the like button or anything like that. I don't like to try to remind people to do these things, but people never remember unless you specifically say, hey, you should do this thing. Thank you. And yeah, it helps a lot to do that. Now, on the sound side of things, audio is just as important as the visual image when you're making stop motion animation. So I wanted to talk about a little bit of the sound stuff. There's a lot more to it than just sound effects. So what we think of as sound effects, the sound of, a gun shooting or something like that, that's the Foley effects. And you do want to include that because the more the viewer can hear what they're seeing, the easier it is to bring them into that state of mind where you're suspending their disbelief and they're brought into the story and they're believing what they're seeing in front of them. It's how you trick their brain into getting into the story. So that's Foley, but there's other stuff that is really important too. You want background noise of some sort throughout the whole thing. Now, this is one of these subtle things that no one outside of video production, audio production world ever thinks about, is that silence doesn't happen. There's always a little tiny bit of background hiss or air noise or something in the background. And when that stops, that's when the human ear notices it and says, uh-oh, there's a problem. It's quiet. It's too quiet. So you always want to have something in the background, even if it's just some very quiet, gentle room noise in the background. that really helps make it feel more real and feel smooth. Okay, and then obviously you can use music, and that's always a great idea to use music because that's really the universal language of all humans. If you go and you watch a stop motion short film from France, for example, you may not understand what the characters are saying, but because they do such a good job with the music, you understand what's happening in the story without needing to know what they're saying. Music is very important. Now, for sound effects and music and these things, you can't use copyrighted music from other people unless it has been released under something like the Creative Commons license. And there is more than one license that allows you to use it. I'm not going to go to the trouble to list them all here, but what I will do is point you over to freesound.org. It's a website where people upload music and sound effects and nature recordings for background noise. Pretty much open the search engine, type in something that you think might lead you in the direction you need to go for a particular type of sound, and magically you will see hundreds of results, and usually very high quality results too. The people on that site do an amazing job. So do check out freesound.org. It's a great resource for Creative Commons licensed sounds that you can use as long as you give attribution or give credit to the person who originally made that sound. Now, if you're interested in making your own music or recording your own voiceovers, then there's a couple of programs that you should know about. The first one is Audacity, Audacity, and this is an open source free audio recorder and editor. It's not really set up for doing music, but it's set up for doing low-level waveform editing stuff and normalization and all this really powerful low-level things for getting the sounds exactly the volume that you need them, exactly the length, cutting off the parts you don't want, all these things for making all of your sound effects in a form that is very easy and efficient to drag them into your video editor. So check that one out. That's Audacity. And for the music side of things, the open source free music program is Reaper. And you can do professional music production on Reaper. I know some guys who do. It's absolutely 100% everything that you could need up until the point where you get into, $1 million studio stuff. It can do everything up to that. So if you're interested in making some music, Reaper, that's the one to check out. Okay, so for open source video editing, this one I actually had to dig, but I did manage to find a really interesting and it's a good way of saying it, promising looking platform for this. It is still under development, but it's a very small development team, and they've been developing it for a lot of years. It's called Shotcut, and it's sort of it's a non-linear video editor, so it's similar to Adobe's or Vegas or Apple's, Final Cut. It's like that, and it can export to all of the formats that YouTube likes. So in that sense, it's a very, very powerful tool because it's open source and free, and it can export to those formats. I know people are always not getting into video editing because of the cost of finding a video editor software that isn't like, $300 to $1,000. Who can afford that sort of thing? So here is a free non-linear editor that will actually run on Windows that can export to all the formats that someone interested in putting something like stop motion up on YouTube needs to have. And it does have a plugin system for all of your, color correction and all that sort of thing. And you can edit clips and put them together, and you can use it to design your logo animations and all that sort of thing. So there's that. Shotcut. It's an extremely useful program for those of you who don't have access to something like Vegas or Adobe. Okay, so that covers all of that. And I did want to mention briefly that for turning your individual images as you're taking pictures in your stop motion filming, you need a good way to turn all of those individual pictures into a video clips to bring into Shotcut. So I dug around and I found a program called Monkey Jam that seems to do a pretty good job of exporting or of importing photos from your camera, arranging them into sequences, checking them. It allows you to page, forward and backwards in the sequence and actually see a preview of what's going on. And then it allows you to export out to a format, file format that Shotcut can load up as a video clip. So that's Monkey Jam. And again, that one's not open source, I don't think, but it is free. So there's no cost there. Yeah. Okay. So there's my collection of tips and tricks for getting the absolute best results for your stop motion animation project for absolutely no cost. You can do everything here that I've talked about with free software, free services, and just picking the correct light bulb from around the house that is bluer than the other ones. All right. Thanks for checking this out. We'll see you guys later.
We post videos all the time, so don't forget to subscribe and follow us on Twitter at TYMKRS.